Good evening and welcome to another developer interview here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. I am Josh Beiser, and we have a great cast lined up. We're going to be talking with veteran game designer Jordan Weisman, who has been responsible for games such as Battletech, MechWarrior, Shadowrun, and more. And for his latest project, he is working on kind of the like an engine or editor software that will allow people to create games of a variety of genres without needing to know about programming, and that is going to be Adventure Forge. So, please welcome from Endless Adventures Incorporated, Jordan Weisman. How are you doing today?
Hey, well, Josh, thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you on. We are, of course, on two completely different coasts of the United States right now, as time zones are always a fun thing. So, how is the weather for you? We are in that lovely summer heat here on the East Coast.
Luckily, where we are right now, it's very mild, a very pleasant 75.
I don't think we're going to be hitting that for a while. It's a lovely 93 here on the
Oh,
East
wow.
Coast. So, staying inside and trying to keep cool. But thank you again for wanting to come on this cast and talk little bit more about Adventure Forge, and again, anything else that we can certainly pop up and discuss. So, I can tell right away, considering that your background, that we will not have the time to talk about everything here today. So, if you are free in the future, I'd love to have you back on because, again, like any one of your previous projects, we could probably spend an hour or two easily discussing.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, there are a few benefits of being older. One of them is you have lots of shit to talk about. Yeah.
Yes, I know. All
So
right.
yeah, happy to come back. Happy to come back and talk about whatever projects are interesting to you.
So, to get things started with, since I have a very interesting mix of audience, of new and veteran developers and people in the industry, to get us started, can you talk a little bit more about kind of like your background, and again, like give us like kind of like the formal introduction to who you are?
Sure. Let's see. Jordan Weisman. I've been had the pleasure of making games now for 40 professionally for 44 years. Which means that I started when dinosaurs still roamed the earth. Uh, I started in the business in pen and paper side with a company called FASA, FASA, where we initially did supplements for Traveler and deck plans and other cool things to add on to Mark Miller's Traveler game. And then that was kind of our springboard. And then from there, did a number of original games, including the Star Trek tabletop RPG, which we did for many years and created all sorts of cool stuff that they've been using in the Star Trek universe and the movies and television shows ever since, which was very cool. And then on to BattleTech and Shadowrun and several of our own games, which luckily people still give a damn about after all these years. Um, BattleTech, yeah, celebrating its 40th anniversary this year, and Shadowrun its 35th. And that to me is amazing. From there, went into virtual reality before they started calling it virtual reality. We were built these multiplayer immersive simulators. The first was in Chicago in the end of '89, beginning of 1990, called the BattleTech Center. It was the first place that the public could play that kind of immersive multiplayer experience. And then built a handful of those around the country and in Japan. And then in '92, the Tim Disney and other members of his family became our partners, and we expanded the concept to virtual world centers and rolled those out, 35 of them around the world. Pioneered a lot of what would become modern day esports with local, regional, national, and international tournaments, broadcast on TV, and all sorts of other good things like that. That was really a huge learning experience and a great experience overall. Mid 90s, worked with Activision on the MechWarrior series of video games, um, and leveraging a lot of what we had learned in the cockpits. And then when their license expired, brought that back in house to develop at Fast Interactive, which was then we were also doing a game called Mech Commander at the time. That was acquired by Microsoft, and that's what moved us all out here to Seattle. And I became creative director for Microsoft Entertainment. At the time, about 300 people focused just on PC games, but of course, then within a year or two, we kicked off Xbox, and I oversaw the first 2 years of Xbox portfolio from the creative director's perspective. That was a hell of a ride,
Hmm.
and did all sorts of amazing and fun projects there, including my own little passion projects like Crimson Skies, and working with Steven Spielberg on his film AI, where we created this giant transmedia experience called The Beast. Um, Boy, is this taking too long? I'm old. Anyway, I guess bottom line, been making video games and tabletop games for a great deal of time in a wide variety of different companies, working at Disney Imagineering and interactive theme parks, and creating big AR experiences and all sorts of other fun stuff. I get bored easily, so I go and do something new every handful of years.
Nice. And you mentioned the Battletech VR. I actually did play that way back. I mean, it was like 91 or 92. Now I get to even feel old like you playing that one. I do remember that. Like, I think I only had a chance to play it one time. Was I like at a friend's birthday party? But that was like
Uh-huh.
my
Yeah.
first real exposure to it as well.
Yeah, we did yeah, it became a great place for parties and events, and because it was a very social experience, which is what we
Hmm.
were really trying to design it for. And we said we learned a ton about electrical engineering and software engineering, but we learned a lot more about social engineering and how people connect and
Hmm.
interact in wires and out of, through wires and directly, and the whole kind of loop, right? The whole
Hmm.
challenge, master and review loop that those were focused on. So yeah, it was fascinating learning.
Hmm. And again, like I'm resisting the urge to ask you a lot of questions about like the industry because every time I have a veteran on, we talk about that. We spend an hour and a half just easily, just like talking about what was a favorite project of yours back in the day. And I don't want to keep you here all day long, so I'm resisting that. But
Well, I appreciate that. And if we can avoid the, what's your favorite mech question, then we'll have dodged what most of the interviews include. So
well, I know I have Battletech fans watching, or they'll be watching this in recorded form, so I'm sure they'll be leaving a lot of comments along those lines down below. So, before we get to talking about Adventure Forge, there's one question that I do want to ask you from a design perspective. It's one I always like to ask when I talk with developers who've done both tabletop and digital games. I guess anything that you find like interesting or different in terms of like I guess like recontextualizing your design when you're working from a tabletop perspective versus a digital or vice versa, because that in of itself is always a very interesting question, and it's one that I think has become very more prevalent in recent years as we're seeing more tabletop experiences kind of being translated to digital or inspiring digital games.
yeah. Well, I think it's an excellent question, and actually a very good segue into Adventure Forge, because
Hmm.
that central question was one of what drove me to want to build this platform. And the way I would kind of sum up the difference between the two, there's lots of kind of detail differences in how do mechanics and all the rest of it, but I think the fundamental difference is in a video game, um, the designers are creating, I should be clear, in a kind of story driven video game,
Hmm.
right? So an RPG or anything that, or a sim that has a campaign or anything that has that kind of scope of story and depth of exploration, um, as opposed to a kind of recreation of a tabletop game in a video game form, right? Um, we, the designers, are telling our story,
Hmm.
right? And we may be telling that story in lots of different permutations, which the players then weave their way through based upon the choices they make within the story. But they're not going to create something fundamentally new,
Hmm.
right? They can only recreate what we've established as a potential, right? Tabletop, exactly the opposite. In tabletop, as a designer, we kind of create the place setting, right? We set the
Hmm.
table, we put the china out, right? But it's the players that make the meal, right? We've provided a list of ingredients, right,
Hmm.
in the context of the setting and the game mechanics, but it's their creativity. And this is particularly true in role-playing games, right? Less so in kind of abstract board games where again you're kind of permutationally limited. But in a role-playing game, because I tend to lean towards more story experiences, that's wide open space, right? Intentionally. That's the
Hmm.
whole joy of a tabletop RPG experience is that you really can go where you and your friends want it to go. All right.
Hmm.
And to me, that's fundamentally different. And again, kind of the inspiration point for Adventure Forge. I mean, we were talking about, BattleTech and Shadowrun being, decades old. And I think one of the reasons they're still fresh is because they're constantly reinvented by the players. They're
Hmm.
constantly an expression of the player's creativity. And obviously the game master is the key of one of those players, but it's that group that is constantly reinventing and constantly taking it in a place that's relevant for them and exciting for them. And the hope is with Adventure Forge that we've empowered people to take that creativity and apply it to video games so that it's constantly in evolution. It's constantly being able to be the game they want it to be at the moment, right?
Hmm.
Or the many, many, many games that it can be at the moment. Because if we kind of set the table again, but not created, the limitations of what the play experience can be.
Hmm. Yep, and for a lot of video games, again, over the last 20 years, we've seen like being able to do more games have been strictly from like a modding perspective. We have seen some fantastic and overwhelmingly amazing mods for just about
Yeah.
any game that has an SDK available, even for the games that don't. And again, like for a lot of people who play video games, there's always that desire to add more to them. But again, the challenge, as I'm sure you're well aware of, and for everyone else aware of, is the programming and kind of the technical side of things. Because again, we've seen, I know for myself, I've seen countless games that can easily become overscoped or issues developed during the development side of things that can just sink an idea. And sometimes people just want to create something simple. If someone just wants to take
Yeah.
a simple idea, say, I want to make a story about, I don't know, running a convenience store. Like, I don't
Right.
want to care about, learning Unreal, or I don't need to care about 4K graphics or making sure this game runs flawless. I just want to make this fun little story for myself. It's oftentimes very hard to find a software that works. And I guess like for my first question for you regarding Adventure Forge itself, like if we look in the past 20 years, we've seen SDKs and software that have done their best to give kind of like different variations or power to someone who doesn't know like a programming engine. So you have everything from GZ Doom to RPG Maker to Twine to Adventure Game Maker. Again, they're for people watching. We can just like start riling off the list of every like free and available editing software. So with Adventure Force itself, I guess like what are you trying to do, or what are you aiming to do that's going to be unique with it, that's kind of going to let it kind of stand on its own compared to the other software that's out there?
Well, I can tell you what we hope,
Mm-hmm.
and where what we've tried to build, but ultimately it's going to come down to the creativity and the passion of the users. But I think you mentioned some really great ones, right? I think and definitely touchstones for us all the way through. I'll start with RPG Maker because I mean, man, 20 years in the market, right? And some great games that have been built with it. It is a wonderful tool set, right? It is very much of a thing though, right? That unless you're going to go and write code yourself,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have to stay in the relatively narrow confines of 1990s, JRPG, because that's what it does, and it does it very well. And if you can write code, right, to do
Mm-hmm.
plugins for it, and extenuate and extend it, you can really do a wide variety of different games that are kind of adjacent to the core JRPG market,
Mm-hmm.
JRPG kind of mechanics. Our approach is to provide kind of a step back of abstraction, and to go across a much wider spectrum of narrative games, right? So we definitely want to include RPGs. I love RPGs, and we weren't gonna we're gonna make something that makes RPGs because I want to make RPGs. Um, but I wanted to make sure that we kind of captured the entire spectrum of narrative games. So that means anything from kind of a text-based choose your own path, like what a Twine would do, or what an Inkle does, right? To visual novels, like Visual Novel Maker does, or other good pieces of software in that category, to dating sims, to click and point adventures, to hidden object games, to puzzle games, all the way to isometric RPGs, which can incorporate everything before it all into kind of that one experience. And so we wanted to have that whole spectrum available, because that's where I'm really excited about where we're going to see a lot of innovation as designers start to come up with different ways that they want to mix things together. Like, I want to
Hmm.
do a isometric RPG for exploration mode, but when we get into combat, it's all going to be in visual novel format,
Hmm.
or whatever it might be. Right? It's combat via hidden object game. I don't know. They're going to come up with all sorts of crazy fun things, which is the whole point.
Hmm.
And then to be able to empower that whole spectrum and then connect it all together in a very kind of atomic way,
Hmm.
so that you can mix and match those things together as much as you want. Um, the core of our innovation, where we started on the project, was how do we get rid of coding,
Hmm.
right? And that's where we spent the first several months, well, more than a year actually. That's actually, if we're looking back on it, is experimenting with lots of different kinds of approaches to this. And there's been many different approaches done. The most common approaches are take some form of
Hmm.
visual programming language approach, right? Which looks very cool and is very approachable. And you can do really cool small things with it. My problem, much again like a Twine project, which is also great at small scale, but when you get into kind of any kind of scale of project or depth of interaction, they both become kind of unwieldy. They become giant kind of spaghetti messes of stuff running all over the place, and it gets very hard to track, right? And even a simple if then statement can become a whole bunch of
Hmm.
boxes with wires running between them. Uh,
Hmm.
and so I started, being an idiot. I eventually came back to the realization that why are there programming languages? Because language is powerful, right?
Hmm.
You can express complex ideas in language, which are so much harder to do in any other form. You know, so how do we, use the power of language, but not have to teach you a new one, right?
Hmm.
And what we arrived at was creating these series of highly contextual drop-down menus that basically you click your way through to create an English sentence. So you would say, if Bob's strength is higher than Sally's constitution, then this happens,
Hmm.
right? Um, and everything you create in the game, characters, statistics, any kind of variable, which we call tags, any object, anything, blah blah, anything you create automatically populates into the appropriate menu so that it's there to click when you need it to be clicked to complete your sentence. You know,
Hmm.
and so that way you have the power of the language, but without the potential of getting syntax wrong. Now you can still get logic wrong, right? And if we're gonna have the power to make great games, then we also are gonna give you the power to fuck things up, because you still have to be able to think through what you want those if then statements to say. You know?
Hmm.
And I can show you a little bit of that on screen if that's useful, on which events take place. A 2D scene, which is a dynamic 2D background, a map, a character sheet, a mini game, a hidden object game, whatever. Those can all be that's all can be built in as a 2D scene, and then events can take place on top of that, or an isometric scene, and then events can take place on top of that. And so in any one of these, so if we jump into one of those scenes, so this is an isometric scene, and then we have a series of events, explore event, a text event, and a 2D event. And these 2D events can then be built into anything you want them to be, whether it's a visual novel or an interface. But they all share kind of a similar approach to logic, which is that all of logic is expressed as an if, a conditional statement, and outcomes. You can have as many conditional statements as you want, and then and or them together, and then give as many outcomes you want, and they'll be then executed in order. And each of those are defined by using a drop-down menu. So in this case, a character, that the selected characters, the current state, is going to equal the default state. And I could have changed that to, I want to change it to mini me state or whatever, naked state, whatever. Um, the uh, and that concept of state is another one that's really important in the tool. Is that everything in the system can have multiple states, and so like a character can have multiple costumes, could have multiple sets of statistics, could have multiple animations. So like if they have a wounded state, they might limp, or if they have a fancy dress ball, then they're change their costume and potentially change their animations to glide around rather than walk around. And you can, modify those by just changing their state from one to a character from one to another, or any object from state. And that includes like even when we get into this is a 2D event, which is using our 2D editor. And the same idea is you can drop anything onto the screen, any image or text, and then you can establish state for it. So in this case, this only has two states, which it's hard to see, but that number one button is
Mm-hmm.
going back up and down based on a hover state or not. And then you can establish behavior for each of those states. So it does a different thing in one state than it does in another. And again, that just brings up the logic tool again, where you can use the drop down menus to create the logic for what's going on there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's a series of kind of basic ideas, which then become powerful when they combined together. Um, and at any point, you can hit play. This is a little thing I was working on for during live. I built this live while we were on Steam earlier this week, and so this was kind of like just an illustration that even though you're using isometric, you can set different scales to it, and to use it for kind of world navigation versus character navigation. So here the idea is now we've gone inside one of those buildings, and so we move into kind of more of a traditional isometric perspective. And if I go over and go talk to this character, then it transitions to a visual novel style format, and the characters can change poses and all the rest of it as we talk as they discuss or animate off it. And then come back to the isometric. That keypad that I just showed, for instance, if I over here, it'll bring up. I want to learn about disco. You know how live events can go. It got a little weird. We were thinking about like, oh, what if there was a disco ball inside of this or disco club inside of this building? Um, uh, so I can, do a skill check, which again, able to do real quickly in this. Um, Exit the main console because I realized that keypad is actually over here. It's after you get the code, you have to come over here and enter it. And the question is, what year did disco start? Josh, take a guess. Well, that's kind of like its biggest year.
Oof. Was it
I
like
can tell you it's in the
oof, and like was it like 1975? I'm right.
close 70.
Ah.
That's close though. All right, so party. So then basically turns on the dance floor. But you can see like the behavior of that interface,
Mm-hmm.
right? As you mouse over stuff, right? That was all driven by that little, and then what the text goes in there, and what's the right code and what's the wrong code, right? So if anytime I do a wrong code, it just clears the screen, and
Mm-hmm.
if I do um, like a right code, like for instance 79, it ends disco, and the dance floor turns off. Um, so so yeah, we can go over here and ask him to follow me, and then he'll come around and follow me now, so on. But you can see basically you can go back and forth between the editor and the play live. You can adjust come to characters. You can use the existing characters that we have here, or you can bring in additional characters if you want. Any the adventure comes with 4 graphic loads to start with. This kind of sci-fi look, low poly sci-fi, low poly fantasy, low poly modern, and then kind of one set in a Renaissance magical version of Renaissance Venice, which is kind of more of a bespoke look. And
Mm-hmm.
those are just they're available to use. But you can also upload all of your own graphics anytime you want, as well as animations and so on. So if we create as you create characters and you create abilities, they show up on a list here, and then you can you know um, set what animations you want them to play when they have that ability, and we can, for instance, say this guy should be much more expressive when he talks. So let's give him a bunch of really crazy animations when he talks. Um, so you get the idea. And then similarly, on locations, um, it's our system uses a kind of a 2.5D
Mm-hmm.
approach. So it has uh, 2D art for your environments and then 3D characters. that move within them. But that said, we have very sophisticated kind of lighting system, as well as being able to just build environments. Drop, for instance, if I go to the tiles here and bring up my tile thing, and I want to drop some more floors. Uh, Hold on, stretch this out here. We'll just grab a floor there, and then just start painting it in.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can put grab props, and again, you can upload all of your own props because they're just a piece of 2D art, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and then you kind of set constraints for like what's its collision volume, what's its rendering volume. We have a tool that allows you to set all that for the piece of art you bring up, and then you can go to lights and say, well, let's take this light and make it really red, and but make it its range really local, but it's really intense. Um, and and then you can, well, let's move it around, move it over here now, so on. So that's how you can build your environments, and you can build really pretty environments with it. And then you can establish zones for logic. So you can say, oh, I want to be able to. So, for instance, the dance floor is I established that as a zone there. You can see. So I know when the player enters the dance floor, they'll start playing a dance animation. Um, or you can also highlight individual tiles, like this one over here, as game master zone. So again, you can use that as triggers for when people walk into different environments. So, but yeah, that's a kind of a uh, quick intro. And hopefully that was I don't hopefully I came across.
Yeah, it was very interesting to watch. I guess one question I wanted to ask you about it, as you said earlier, you're making this so there's no like visible code. Like, it's going to be all done using the drop downs and that. For someone watching who is interested in like doing kind of like programming and stuff along those lines, are they allowed to access or add code to Adventure Forge, or is that going to be just like not available in like the version?
So yes and no. The the no of it is that our core application doesn't really have a place for you to inject code or to do kind of plugins at this point. I think it is something we'd love to look at in the future, but there's a bunch of work to support that we haven't done yet. And the yes is that we save all of the files in JSON, right? So when you're
Mhm.
creating an adventure, you're creating this sophisticated JSON blob, and then when that adventure is getting consumed, it's
Mhm.
getting consumed by our player, to play back that JSON.
Mhm.
And so, you know, enterprising people may decide that they want to go and create a different editor that allows them to manipulate the JSONs in different ways to add different features that we don't currently have available. Of course, we'd also have to watch out because if that changes the play dynamic, you'd also have to make sure that it matches over on the player side. So, I mean, I think it is. I would put it as a not yet. In the future, we'd love to be able to figure out ways so that more plugins can get made, but we haven't done that yet. And our core approach is more people like yourself who are really
Mhm.
interested in game design but don't have those engineering skills,
Mhm.
and or someone who is an engineer who's going to put up with the constraints that we've created, because it's enormously empowering to a non-engineer, but can be restraining to an actual engineer. You know.
Mhm. All right. And with kind of like the scope of the games, you mentioned a visual novel, kind of like action or ARPG, kind of like isometric view, hidden object. Have you or like anyone like's been like working with Adventure Forge? Have you like done any like really experimental or like really push the engine to do something like different?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. So let me take through a couple of little videos, if that make sense, and then we can talk about some of the stuff going on there. So I'm going to. Um, so this is a little intro to. So this is a game one our team is working on called Dairy of the Dead, and it uses the kind of low poly modern day graphic set that I mentioned. And the premise is that we've got our cat here, who's demanding of his owner that that Alex needs to go get milk for him in the midst of a zombie apocalypse, because cats are demanding, and so you've got it's a kind of a confined environment of walking around, interacting with humans and zombies. And then some really wonderful mini games that the team has designed, which unfortunately don't show up in this quick teaser much. But also it's really like interesting chess games and other kinds of variants of like you hang out with a conspiracy theorist and he really wants you to connect things together on his board, and you have to match that together. Another game that our team has been working on, which I'll share, is called Icarus, and this one uses the kind of sci-fi um, set. And the premise is that you wake up in a derelict spaceship, and you have to figure out what the heck's going on. Kind of classic setup, space game setup. And they did a great job, kind of again using our kind of normal graphic load that's available for anybody to work with. You'll notice some of these pieces are very familiar from the little piece I was just messing with, right, in terms of being able to work stuff together. Um, and yeah, and this is I use the same graphics to build my little disco thing, and similar graphics here to load that, so you can you know take these pieces and reconnect them all together. And then you can use you'll see at the end here there's a little like cinematic, which you can use our 2D tool to assemble. In doing these, we learned we need to, that boy, it would be better if we had more tools available to help with these cinematics. So that became one of the things on the list to add. And then uh, let me show you some that are not part of our graphic set as an example for your kind of like people doing the interesting things with it. So out of a game jam, one of the elements put together this beautiful little setting for a game he called Own, created by Oscar, and the premise is you got all these little characters in the lily pad, and they wake up, and Oscar wants his breakfast, but this big stone statue's in the way, and so he has to go around and talk to all the other little inhabitants of the lily pad, the turtle, the frog, and the butterflies to help them get help to move the statue out of the way. And there's all sorts of little puzzles. I'm clicking through to advance a little bit here. Puzzles to go through, finding in the waterfall and so on. And eventually you get to the frog, and the frog's like, "Okay, help me catch my breakfast, and then I'll help you." And so his breakfast is played out in a memory game. We have to remember where they are and pack them. Classic kind of gameplay. And so this was all came out of a game jam over a couple of days. So we were very excited how that came together really quickly, and just the beautiful look of it that Oscar created. Another one that was really blew us away was one of our users. Um, Hold on, I lost track of there we go. Share the screen here. Um, so here he used some graphics we had from our Venice set, but then totally created a new environment. So this whole he basically used a feature of our system that allows you to have a foreground and a background painting and kind of sandwich the isometric between them, much like how Hades is done. And so he created this kind of Escher-esque, kind of slightly warped environment for it to all run in, and it just looks nothing like anything we had done with our tile-based sets, which was really exciting to see. And again, as users do a credible thing, it definitely inspires stuff in us, and we are like, oh, wait a minute, that's amazing. We should definitely make that easier to do. And so that led us to this thing, which actually we're working on right now. So it'll be out. It'll come into our closed beta in about three weeks or so, which is a paint over system. So you can just white box your level out, and then export it. to whatever paint program you want to use, paint the terrain, and then bring it back in, and it will then Z sort it properly to be, in the proper relationship between the characters, the props, and the environment. So now you can really make, if you've got some artistic chops, you can really make it look like anything you want, um, which is super exciting for us. And then you can take the technique that Zach did, the guy who did the foreground and background, and put those foreground and background paintings on either side of this now custom painted environment. So that's really going to open up what it's capable of looking like. But Zach wasn't, after blowing us away, Zach decided that he needed to to blow us away again. And I'll show you what he did. He put this one in a couple weeks later. Um, and it dropped our draws because we were like, what? So he used some characters from the existing kind of Venetian setting, and then created this little classroom, and borrowed art to do a little kind of like kids teasing a witch in the classroom, and then the witch gets upset and takes her ball and goes home. In this case, the ball she's going home with is the color of the world. So she just sucked the whole color out of the world, and then if you're nice to her, um, she puts the color back into the world. And we were all like, what? How did you do that? No code, no nothing, just using the existing tool. He was basically was able to show us how using that foreground and background technique and then creating an animation for those, as opposed to a static one, allowed him to put that kind of thing together. So we love when users blow us away.
Again, like we could sit here and chat for hours and hours on end, so I'm resisting the urge to ask you any like major questions. But I do have some kind of like logistics and general questions for you about Venture Forge before we get to kind of like our wrap up for the cast. Anything else you want to mention in terms of like design, development, utility of a Venture Forge that you haven't had a chance to yet?
Um, well, I think the other big challenge that comes in creating games is how to distribute them,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you make your own game, having to set up your own accounts on iOS, Android, Steam, and so on, and pay all those developer fees to then be able to release your game, even if you're just trying to share it with a friend, or a number of friends. And so we wanted to kind of streamline that. So in Adventure Forge, you can just press a button, and then it's available inside of your game is available inside of the Adventure Forge application. Um, you can also then decide, I really don't want the whole world to see this. I only made it for like my old D&D club, and because it's like all in jokes, and I don't want anybody else ragging on us because they don't get the jokes. That's great. You can just share it with them. You don't have to share it with the whole world, right? If you do want to share it with the world, that's easy to do as well. And so I think, we're trying to make it that it's not only, fun to create, it's also easy to share. I will say though, there is no such thing as simple, fast game design. Actually, I'm wrong, right? If we want to touch on AI for a second, there's out at the moment, and there's going to be a lot more coming soon. You're going to be able to type a prompt in, and it'll make a game for you, and that's going to make making games incredibly easy. I don't think those are games that people are going to want to play very much, though, because you don't. The prompt is not a great way to exercise the level of control that a great game takes to make, right? I know your podcast is about design, and design is the accumulation of thousands of individual decisions, and every one of those has to be addressable and tweakable because they're all any one of them can break or make your game. And if you can't get your fingers on every little button you need to, then you've given up control and an opportunity to really tweak it and make it great. Because games like writing, they suck the first 100 times you make them. You know, uh, it's like it's all about iteration equals quality. And so that's why one of the key things for us in creating Adventure Forge was that ability to click right back and forth, right? No builds, no nothing. Like it's like bam, bam, click back and forth, try something, click. And I didn't show any of the debug tools and stuff like that, but you can actually, tweak all the variables while you're playing, so you don't have to keep going back, resetting a variable, going back and playing. Yeah, because again, you want to speed that loop from idea to playtest and then back to to try it again. The shorter that loop is, the better your game's going to be. But you're going to have to go through that loop a lot of times, and so you want to be ready for that, right? It's not going to be. We say, I look at it as Adventure Forge for people who want to be games craftsmen, right? not somebody who just wants to, not somebody who's more interested in curiosity of typing a prompt and having a game spit out.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on the subject of AI, again, that's another very long topic we can get into. But for the sake of clarity for people watching, what does Adventure Forge like use like with like AI generation? Can people like turn that off? Like, what is kind of like AI's role with Adventure Forge?
So as of this point in time, it's zero. Like everything
Hmm.
I showed you, there's no AI in any of that.
Hmm.
Because from our point of view, the key is human control,
Hmm.
right? It's about the creator and the creative team's control of the experience. And so when we do get around to integrating AI, and we have been playing with it on different branches about how it can empower, and
Hmm.
help you in the creative side. So for things like when you're writing dialogues and descriptions, being able to ask a large language model for ideas, right? And
Hmm.
then, oh, that's a fun one, but I can make it 5 times better. The key thing for me is, because it's true, blank sheets of paper sometimes you get stuck, and having the chatbot kick out something can get you started, which is awesome. But you need to be in control, right? You
Hmm.
need to be able to have the edit, to be able to go, oh no, okay, I'm going to change this and this. Okay, got me started. Oh, that's all crap, but now it gave me a good idea. So it's important that you're in control. So that is something we do look forward to offering users if they want to have some suggestive writing.
Hmm.
Similarly, eventually on the graphic side, we've been working with some teams on training the generators just on our art, so we're not ripping off any other artist's style,
Hmm.
which is really important to us. So, for instance, inside of our Fortunata, which is our Renaissance Venice environment, we have like 1,000 props, but odds are when you're making your game, there's probably one that we didn't think of. And it would be nice if you could then, have it generate, I don't know, an ice cream cart for you. Well, I guess it's Italy, a gelato cart for you, that you want in your game, and it matches the style of the art that we've done for all the rest of it. We think that would be nice, but we want to make sure that it's limited to, our style, that it's today art we've created, that we're not ripping off on other people's art. So that's another thing we're looking at adding in the future as well. Um, Potentially in the future, help you write logic, right? The key thing for us, though, again, is that when the system writes logic, it expresses it in the same drop down menus so that it's easy for you to tweak. You can go back and understand everything that it's done and know where to turn the dials to be able to get the gameplay you want. But these are all things that would come in the future, right? As of this point, for us, the key thing was empower the humans first, and then figure out how to use AI to empower them further, not replace them.
All right. And yeah, again, I'm trying to hold back a lot of the questions because it will be here for hours upon hours. So, I guess before we go into, I guess like kind of like final wrap up for the cast, anything else you want to mention? Anything else you forgot about Venture Forge? Anything for people listening to take us out
Yeah,
on?
I've been working on this for a number of years, so I could go on for hours just about Forge and all the cool stuff in it. Um, you know, uh, I think we didn't really get into like the conversation editors or how all those kind of things work. But there's lots of depth there to be able to take advantage of. And I think in terms of kind of large paradigms, I talked briefly about state, and that's really important. We use that throughout, and it's a very powerful concept. The other concept we use, that's a more advanced one, but once people kind of grok it, once they get it, it becomes really powerful for them to use, is what we call weighted navigation, and more applicable to your design oriented group here, is that in thinking about like narrative flow, or even logic flow. Most things like Twine and everything else are kind of a node-based system where the current node has to be aware of all future nodes, right? And the logic
Hmm.
for which future node to go to all has to be contained in the current node, right? That's the
Hmm.
way every kind of branching story system works. And it works really well at small scale, but it's very hard to expand over time because you have to keep
Hmm.
working your way up the trees. And then when you add a new option way up in a tree, it then has to filter all the way down through the tree. It's very hard to maintain. And the logic becomes more and more complex in that current node, the more potential future nodes there are. Um, So I came up with kind of a backwards solution to that, where the current node is ignorant of all future nodes.
Hmm.
And it's more of a search orientation. So the current node just asks the nodes to search themselves, to run a search among themselves and decide, each node individually determine whether it's valid in the current game state through one set of logic that the designer creates. And if it is valid, then it goes to another block of logic which says, how interesting am I? What's my weight in the current game state? And this paradigm becomes super powerful to be able to have highly contextual conversation responses based upon what's going on in the game, and but then use it. We use it all throughout, not just in conversation. So we use it. It becomes a really powerful tool to select which logic block should run, which
Hmm.
means we use that for doing simple behavioral AIs, right? For your characters, for your NPCs, right? Oh, my character knows how to patrol, he knows how to eat, knows how to drink, he's tempted to gamble, right? So those four are constantly running the self-evaluation loop to determine, well, what does my character want to do at this point? Oh, he wants to stick to his patrol, but when his hunger overcomes his dedication, then he goes and gets a snack. So you can set up those kind of dynamics very easily. And so those are from a design standpoint, those are some of the more kind of interesting, more advanced stuff that's inside Adventure Forge to play with.
All right. Sounds very interesting. So, I guess to start to wrap things up for our chat then. So, right now, Adventure Forge is not currently out. You're planning on releasing it in early access. Do you have any, like, estimated dates for when the public will be able to check it out?
Yeah, it was about a year ago.
Hmm.
So no, I'm teasing. Well, only I wish I was teasing altogether, but it's going to be this year for
Hmm.
sure. And it's going to be at some point this summer. We just don't know exactly when yet.
Okay. And for people listening who have, like, done play testing or have, like, tried it out, are there any teasers or, like, I guess, like, what is kind of like the future plans, or have you thought about future plans for it once it's out?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, the reason we're launching in early access is that we still have a lot of things we want to add to it. And in success, we'll never stop adding to it. But
Hmm.
there are some big things we want to get done before we go to kind of V1, V 1.0. Um, One of those is our tactical combat system.
Hmm.
Right now, we have isometric explore mode, and it's extremely robust in how you can interact with the environment and characters and so on. And people, because exactly the kind of creativity that we're trying to inspire, people have already made their own turn-based tactical system inside of our real-time exploration mode. But we also want to offer people an easier way to make turn-based tactical combat, and so we're working on a big, a module for that would allow you to customize how you want your combat to work, what kind of initiative, what kind of turn order, create your own abilities, create your own statistics to be able to govern your own combat. So that's a big one. The other one is collaboration. So right now, you can invite people to collaborate on your adventure, but only one of you can be in the adventure at a time,
Hmm.
right? We are working on a system that moves that to be a simultaneous system. So much more like Google Docs, where you can invite your friends, can all be online at the same time, and each of you working on different aspects. I can be working on the character Charlie. You're working on the character Sally, and another one's working on an environment. And as each time we hit save, it immediately propagates to all the rest of us. So we all see those changes. And anytime any one of us hits play, we're playing with the latest. So there's
Hmm.
no builds, no merges, none of that kind of stuff. It's much more kind of a Google Docs approach. And so that's something we're working on for later this year as well. And then we have there's a whole bunch of other features in there in terms of like things like persistent UIs, so that I can create those kind of graphical UIs, but then I can have that over the top of the isometric and have it live while the isometric's live and things like that. A lot of incredibly cool features that regard. Um, Data-driven display module, so it's easy to hook up an inventory module and have it display inside anywhere you want and things like that. So an endless list of stuff coming out that we're excited to keep building.
All right. And I guess the final question for you then, in terms of pricing, is this going to be something that is going to be like free to download? Is there going to be a retail price for, like, what have you thought in terms of like monetization regarding Adventure Forge?
Um, so I think during early access, the way we're viewing it is that the application on Steam will be free,
Hmm.
and that allows you to play any of the games that have been created inside Adventure Forge, the ones we've created, the one users are creating, and then there'll be an in-app purchase to unlock the editing tools. So we haven't quite figured out what that pricing will be. It'll probably change over the course of early access as more and more features come in. But that will be an unlock so that it's more like in the obviously, won't be anywhere near as expensive as like RPG Maker is right now because it doesn't have 20 years of features in it. But it'll be kind of in that model where you purchase the tools to unlock and start to create with them. Users will then be able to monetize their creations if they want. So they can, just decide to charge Forge coins for their games, and then players can buy Forge coins inside of the environment. And there's a revenue share kind of a relationship with the creators.
Okay. Well, again, with that, I think we are just about out of time. But like I said, Jordan, at the start, if you are free to chat in the future about game dev or any one of the games you worked on, I'm sure we can easily fill an hour or 4 or 5 on that topic.
I would be happy to. Why don't you put together a list of what you want to talk about, and let's find a date.
All right. So, to end things on for our cast tonight, in terms of social media, anything you want to mention, places people can find you, find Adventure Forge, go right ahead.
So I've always historically been kind of social media shy, and that kind of continues. But Adventure Forge, you can find both Adventure Forge. If you go to adventureforge.games, there you'll find all the links for all of our social. And our Discord, and we'd love you to come in and start getting involved. There are opportunities to get involved in the closed beta, and so actually, we should talk. We get you some closed beta keys that you could distribute to your watchers as well.
All right. Well, I think with that, Jordan, we will say goodnight for our chat. For people watching, you'll find links to Adventure Forge down below. And yeah, for myself, again, for the people tuning in, do the YouTubing stuff, check out the Discord, the Patreon, buy all the copies of the books I've written. And again, best of luck for you and for the rest of the team with Adventure Forge.
Thank you, Josh, for having me on tonight.
All right. So with that said, everyone, thank you once again for tuning in, and come back for those questions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Until our next chat, have a great rest of your night.